On May 28, 1940, inside a locked room in London, 5 men argued about whether to surrender to Adolf Hitler, and the entire outcome of World War II came down to one person refusing to sit down. This video covers the chain of decisions that led to Allied victory in World War II. Not the battles, not the weapons, the specific choices made in rooms most people have never heard of, by people under enormous pressure, that compounded on top of each other until Germany and Japan had no path to win. Some of these decisions were made by Allied leaders. Some of the most important ones were made by Hitler himself. Stay until the end, because the final decision in this chain is one most people never connect to Allied victory. And without it, every other decision on this list likely fails. Before any of the famous battles, before D-Day, before Stalingrad, before a single American soldier set foot in Europe, there was a meeting in London that almost ended the war before it started, on Hitler's terms. It was May 1940. France was collapsing. The British Expeditionary Force was surrounded at Dunkirk. Inside the British War Cabinet, a 5-man body that set all British war policy, Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax made a proposal. He wanted to use Italian dictator Benito Mussolini as a mediator to sound out what terms Hitler might offer Britain to end the war. Halifax was not suggesting full surrender. His argument was practical. If Germany dominated the continent and Britain lost its army in France, the British Empire might not survive anyway. Better to negotiate from whatever position remained than to fight on with nothing. Halifax had support. Former Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, still leader of the Conservative Party and still enormously powerful in Parliament, initially leaned Halifax's way. Without Chamberlain, newly appointed Prime Minister Winston Churchill could have been forced from office by his own party's majority in the House of Commons. The debate ran for 3 days, May 26th, 27th and 28th, 1940. According to records at the UK National Archives, Churchill argued that any negotiation from that position would leave Hitler dominant in Europe and Britain trapped inside a settlement it could never enforce. He told his cabinet that Germany's terms would include a demand for the British fleet and that Britain would effectively become a puppet state. On May 28th, Churchill made a move that ended the debate. He called a meeting of his 25-member outer cabinet, second-tier ministers who individually carried less political weight, but whose unanimous support would undercut Halifax completely. According to accounts documented at militaryhistorynow.com, Churchill told them Britain should not expect better terms from Germany by negotiating than by fighting. He told them that if the island's story was to end, it would end only when every man lay choking in his own blood upon the ground. The outer cabinet gave him unanimous support. Chamberlain shifted to Churchill's position. Halifax accepted the result. The debate was over. 3 days later, Operation Dynamo evacuated 338,000 Allied soldiers from Dunkirk. Those soldiers went on to fight in North Africa, in Italy, and on the beaches of Normandy. Britain stayed in the war. Without that decision on May 28, 1940, there is no base for D-Day. There is no Atlantic supply line. There is nowhere to land an army in Europe. Every Allied victory that followed was built on that foundation. 4 days after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States. No treaty required him to. Japan had attacked America, not Germany. Hitler owed Japan nothing. He did it voluntarily. That decision brought the largest industrial economy in the world into the war against Germany at the exact moment Germany was already stalling outside Moscow. Most historians, including Niall Ferguson in The War of the World, consider it the single biggest strategic mistake of the entire conflict. But America entering the war created an immediate problem. The American public wanted to fight Japan. Japan had attacked American soil. Japan had killed American sailors. The pressure on President Roosevelt to pour everything into the Pacific was enormous. 14 days after Pearl Harbor, on December 22, 1941, Churchill arrived in Washington for a conference codenamed Arcadia. Over the next 3 weeks, Churchill and Roosevelt made the decision that shaped the entire Allied war effort. They agreed on a Germany first strategy, meaning roughly 70% of all Allied resources would go toward defeating Germany before Japan. According to the National World War II Museum's account of the Arcadia Conference, American planners and their British counterparts agreed that Germany represented the most dangerous and immediate threat to global security. Defeating Germany first would allow all Allied forces to then concentrate fully on Japan afterward. That decision kept Britain supplied. It kept the Soviet Union in the fight. It produced D-Day. And it ended the war in Europe by May 1945, freeing the full weight of Allied power to finish Japan by August of the same year. Here is a number most people have never heard. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States shipped the Soviet Union 375,000 trucks, 14,000 aircraft, 13,000 tanks, and 4.5 million tons of food. According to Russia Beyond and documented Soviet records, this program, called Lend-Lease, also included enough explosives and gunpowder to keep the Red Army firing its rifles, enough steel to build its tanks, and enough locomotives and rail cars to move supplies across a country the size of a continent. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the Soviet general most responsible for defeating Germany on the Eastern Front, was recorded by KGB wiretap in 1963, saying the following: "The Americans gave so many goods without which the Soviet Union would not have been able to form its reserves and continue the war." He specifically named explosives, gunpowder, steel, and trucks. Without American trucks, Zhukov said, there would have been nothing to pull Soviet artillery with. The Soviet Union bore the weight of the Eastern Front. Roughly 80% of all German military casualties in the entire war occurred fighting the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union ran on American supplies. The decision to fund and ship Lend-Lease, made by Roosevelt in March 1941, before America even entered the war, kept the largest land army in history operational at its most critical moments. Now here is where the story turns completely. Some of the most important decisions that led to Allied victory were not made by Allied leaders at all. They were made by Hitler. In late 1943 and early 1944, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel and Commander-in-Chief West Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt disagreed sharply about how to defend France against the coming Allied invasion. Rommel wanted panzer armored divisions positioned close to the beaches, arguing that the first 24 hours would decide everything, and that tank divisions needed to meet the invaders at the water. Rundstedt wanted the panzers held back in reserve to strike after the landing point was confirmed. Hitler imposed a compromise that satisfied neither man. He kept most of the panzer divisions under his own personal control, meaning they could not move without his direct authorization. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed at Normandy. Hitler was asleep at his private residence in Bavaria. His staff refused to wake him. He did not receive news of the landings until afternoon, more than 8 hours after the first troops hit the beaches. According to military.com's account, even then, Hitler initially dismissed Normandy as a feint, convinced by the Allied deception campaign, Operation Bodyguard, that the real invasion was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. He did not release the panzer divisions until 4 p.m. that afternoon, nearly 12 hours after the landings began. By then, the Allied beachhead was established. According to the D-Day Center's account of Operation Fortitude, Hitler then delayed moving reinforcements from Pas-de-Calais to Normandy for almost 7 weeks after D-Day, still believing a second larger invasion was coming. The 15th Army, with 19 divisions, sat in Calais doing nothing while the Allies broke out of Normandy. Rommel had told Hitler's command structure that if the armored reserves were not released immediately, the battle would be lost. He was right. According to History.com's account of D-Day, Rommel had been handcuffed by rules that said he could not move his armored formations without Hitler's personal approval. Hitler did not give that approval until it was too late. Between January and June 1944, 9 million tons of supplies and 800,000 soldiers crossed the Atlantic from the United States to Britain in preparation for D-Day, according to National Geographic's account of Operation Overlord. The buildup was made possible by one thing: Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, which had cleared German U-boats from the supply lanes by 1943. On June 5, 1944, one day before the planned invasion, the weather turned bad. High winds and rough seas made the crossing dangerous and the landing almost impossible. General Dwight Eisenhower's chief meteorologist, Group Captain James Stagg, told him there was a narrow window of marginally acceptable weather on June 6th that would close again for weeks. Eisenhower made the call. He gave the order to go on June 6th. More than 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops landed along 50 miles of Normandy coastline. Within 3 months, Paris was liberated. Within 11 months, Berlin had fallen. The Allied victory in World War II was not the result of one battle or one moment. It was the result of a chain of decisions, each one building on the last, that compounded into an outcome Germany and Japan could not overcome. Churchill refusing to negotiate in May 1940 gave the Allies a base. Roosevelt and Churchill agreeing on Germany first gave the Allies a strategy. Lend-Lease gave the Soviet Union the trucks and explosives it needed to destroy the German army in the east. Hitler, holding his panzer divisions under personal control, gave the Allies the hours they needed on June 6th to establish a beachhead that could not be dislodged. And Eisenhower's decision to launch on June 6th, despite dangerous weather, put 156,000 men on the beaches before the window closed. Remove any one of those decisions, and the chain breaks. The war that most people think was won on the beaches of Normandy was actually won in a locked room in London 4 years earlier, by 5 men arguing around a table, and one of them refusing to sit down.